We are alive, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for joining us today. I have Miko Matsumura. He is the general partner, or one of the general partners, I guess, at Gumi Cryptos. Miko, I'm super excited to have you on the show today. How are you doing?
Doing great, thanks.
So one of the reasons why I wanted to have these conversations is I kind of ended up in the venture capital sector by accident. And one of my favorite aspects of this whole scenario of kind of blockchain in general has been this participation reward for early network growth of so many things. It was almost impossible for the average person to invest in Twitter, but we're the reason it's so valuable. And as I started to learn more about venture capital, I'm a big fan of mathematics and philosophy. I wanted to start to reach out to other people in the sector and get their general understanding of and how they ended up here. So, Miko, you want to kind of introduce yourself and share your story about venture capital so far?
Yeah, absolutely. So, we're about 3.5 years into our first fund, and we're raising our second fund. So, I'm relatively new to the world of venture capital. Fund one, it looks like if you measure it at the current snapshot, we're in the top 1% of venture capital funds with respect to returns. So I think it's a super healthy fund. And I think one of the things that I think is so important really has been, they asked me like, well, how do you achieve sort of overnight success? And my riff to them was, I think it's good to spend a couple decades in a completely thankless area like open source developer software tools, and so that was my joking answer, right? So I think that does go right back to my origins, which is I've been working on open source software for probably 30 years, starting with the Java programming language. So, it really is, I guess I would say, I'm just kind of a nerd, or at least nerd adjacent. So I'm very excited about kind of emerging technology and the potential for transformation. So, I think one of the things that's super challenging about today is that we're facing exponential challenges that we're sort of demonstrably bad at dealing with, through traditional mechanisms, regulation, legislation, democratic government. There's so many different complexities that we're facing. So, I think we need to kind of look for beneficial exponential capabilities to sort of meet some of these challenges. So that's sort of my mindset.
Yeah, the tech sector has, even since the early days when I was younger, going from the transistor radio to the digital tech age we are, this idea that it was a Buckminster Fuller quote too, around this idea that we've got so many regulators of regulators. The middleman right now is causing a huge amount of problem for the expansion and the growth. We talked about your background going from kind of the tech space. What about the venture capital sector attracted you at first, and how did the kind of your first steps and foray kind of take place?
Yeah, so I was really in a developer evangelism role at Sun Microsystems back in 1994, 95, so way back in the beginning of the commercialization of the internet. And I think we actually had a venture fund called the Java Fund, right, which is basically an ecosystem fund for investing in highly proficient or exciting independent software vendors using the technology, right? So that was my first exposure to venture capital. And, I felt like this is a super interesting area because it has to do with sort of really identifying, emerging trends, emerging data, and really, I think you were talking about participation in the economic benefits of network effects. So, I think that was a very exciting time, and that was kind of when I first caught the bug. I mean, I spent probably almost 30 years on the entrepreneur side of venture capital, and only until recently got onto the VC side of venture capital, figure out what their what the evil side was thinking.
Yeah, it's fun. I've I ended up here by accident, but I see that there's a similarity in the interest, the growth of the technology. I use the word evangelic for like the tech or the software world, and often I think that there's this conversation that's going on, and we see it developing in the blockchain world too, even though we're not always poignantly aware, but there's downside to all technology. We're dealing with such complex systems. You mentioned words like democracy. We get into ideas about voting and governance, and the way blockchain can help write a new path for that, and the potential downsides there. One of the fun parts that I've stumbled into lately is we've gone from a layer one conversation, which is mostly what we were focused on up until the last, say, 9 months. And I've started to do a lot more video game research. Now, when we first chatted back in 2020, and I invited you on, you guys were making a really early investment into OpenSea, and you and your partner saw something that I didn't necessarily see coming until the video game, or like actually started to make a bit more sense to me. Do you want to tell us about witnessing these emerging trends? Because this is one of the areas I think we have in common. Like, how do you find and attenuate an idea in these different themes and these evolving trend lines?
Yeah. So, I think it is amazingly the story of struggle. I mean, I think you could argue that successful venture capitalists kind of have the quality of like dart throwing monkeys, which is if you get a large enough group of monkeys to throw darts, like they're gonna have hits, right? So, that's one way of looking at it. But I would say that the other way of looking at it is more like this idea of a struggle, right? Because my partner actually founded a game company, a mobile gaming company, and he took that company public. And I think that company is called Gumi, which is ended up being the name of our fund, Gumi Crypto's Capital. And so his game company actually became the publisher and acquired a smaller company called Double Jump Tokyo. And Double Jump actually published a game called My Crypto Heroes, right? And it was actually a very, very, very early blockchain game that was designed to introduce multiplayer fantasy role-playing into something almost like CryptoKitties. So it was, I would say too early, right? And obviously it's still a going concern and still an exciting game that you should check out. And I think it's, could have a huge resurgence with Axie, but I would say that like it was one of the earliest kind of blockchain games. And the thing that happened with it was the struggle of producing the game actually created conviction in OpenSea. One of the things we discovered about OpenSea is that they were passionately reaching out to every single NFT related project, which at the time was a finite number of projects. Now it's an insane idea, but like Alex and Devin from OpenSea were both kind of super aggressively reaching out to everyone, right? And so if you find a team that's sort of building a network effect so deliberately and aggressively in an early field, the question you have to ask yourself, a couple questions, right? Already the question of why would it be this one is answered by the behavior of these founders, right? But so the question then becomes, does the market want there to be a big one of these? Right. We had a similar question around YGG is, does the market want there to be a really big one of these? Right. Because sometimes markets don't want a single big one. Sometimes markets want like 1,000 small ones that are all fragmented. Right. So, we came to the conclusion of, if you want an NFT, you should go to place X. Right. So, that's an incredibly convenient thing. Right. Like Amazon is like, if you want a physical object, go to Amazon. Right. Like that's a great utility, and it's super easy for humans, right? So for us, we knew that there was something important that was being made, and our conviction was in this particular one. Our conviction was, okay, it's going to be, if there is one of these, it'll be Alex and Devin. That was our conviction. So and similar to the YGG story, we got a subsequent investment through A16Z. And they also have been incredibly supportive. They're a very, very well resourced and supportive ecosystem. They have a $2.2 billion crypto only fund. So we think they're a great partner for projects like this.
Yeah, that's a great point about the founders. It's kind of one of the threads I've noticed between everyone who does really well in these sectors, the ability to look for good founders. I would assume this likely comes from the idea that you would need to pivot to you like the that Nintendo tweet that I found from the creator of Nintendo about they said video games are bad, but they said the same thing about rock and roll.
I love
you know,
that.
yeah, I really I liked it as well too. One of my favorite things, aside from just the research, because you're often dealing with data and a bit more of a, let's say, a hypothesis, something that you could prove regardless of the founder. But the founder is I think one of the most exciting parts. When you're going, how do you find the best way to like nurture and encourage conversation and ideas while also kind of criticizing them? Is there a way, like, how do you find yourself most productive with people and founders? Because people is like the lifeline of all of these ideas working effectively.
Yeah, it's amazing actually. The first thing that I like to personally do is I like to kind of always try to be helpful no matter what. There's sort of a magic time period before you have any economic interest in a person or project at all, right? And that's a magic time period, right? Because for most portfolio companies, like you spend most of your time relating to them in a context where you have a vested economic interest in helping them, right? So the magic period is actually before that, right? So if you're provably helpful before that, right, then then you have a relationship basis, right? Otherwise, you're just trying to like enrich yourself, and while there's nothing really wrong with that, it kind of lacks moral authority, right? Like, someone who's trying to enrich themselves is sort of like inherently lacking in moral authority. If you go back to the Bronze Age, the Homer's Iliad shows two character versions of Achilles. So at the beginning of the Iliad, it shows Achilles trying to get more loot, right? He's creating loot drama. He's saying, I'm not getting enough loot, right? And all the kings and the princes and all the Achaeans, the Greeks, are basically like, screw you, buddy. Like, we don't care what you have to say. Agamemnon is the king of all the kings, and you just want more loot, so your opinion doesn't count, right? At the end of the Iliad, the enemy king, Priam, has basically asked for the body of his son and 9 days to bury him. So Achilles basically grants it to him without even consulting anyone. And the next thing you know, Homer's showing the 9-day burial games of Hector, right? And so what we infer that Achilles attained the moral authority of a king of kings, right? So the thing that I think is really interesting when you study that and you study this Bronze Age loot drama, you begin to realize that, like, crying for more loot doesn't endear you to anyone, and it doesn't actually give you any real power, right? That the real power comes from nonviolence rather than violence, and that the real power comes from relationship, right? And the real power comes from moral authority, as opposed to some kind of, like, Agamemnon is the false king, and he gets his power from like cruelty and avarice and, bullying, right? And Priam is the true king who gets his power from nonviolence and moral authority. So that's my reading of this Bronze Age loot drama.
Yeah, I agree. There, one of my mentors started a company called Silk Almond Milk. I'm sure a few people have tried their product before, and he was telling me about his kind of growth through this multi-billion-dollar company and where it started. This idea of produce something valuable for the community. That ultimately there is almost like this spiritual entanglement with work, if you look at it from a highly productive level, which is, what are you providing that's valuable for other people? And that if you get if the net outcome of getting that right is often more money, but that's the symptom and side effect of getting the first part right, which is communicating something productive and valuable to the community with service or product or any number of things a person could do. So I agree with this sentiment as well.
But I wanna characterize this, which is what I look for is something I call diamond head, but like human
diamond
ears,
head,
right? Diamond head, human ears. And what I mean by diamond head is that I want entrepreneur whose head is made out of diamond, right? People talk about diamond hands, right? It's a diamond head, right? And why do they need a diamond head? Because that head is going to go through like that. You've got like a brick wall behind you, like, or it looks like wood. Anyhow, the head is going to go through a brick wall, right? Like you want someone who's incredibly rugged and durable, right? Whose ideas are so firmly held that they're, but at the same time, you also want ears. You want ear holes, right? Like, because in a sense, like, so one of the examples that I have recently is we just recently did an investment seed stage into something called D Horizon. Right. So
yeah, I saw that
D
one. Looks
Horizon.
great.
Yeah. It's really going to be an amazing project. But what happened to this entrepreneur is the first time we encountered him, he pitched a company to us and we turned him down. We were like, no, we don't really like this opportunity. We're grateful that you showed it to us. Like we think you're a great guy. We're not sure about this thing. This is some years ago. Right. And this guy came back literally years later and he's like, I'm oversubscribed, but I have room for you guys. Like, he's like, I want you in our round. Like we really want to work with you. And I was like, okay, so tell me why. Right. And he had good things to say about our fund. And like, people always say good things about our fund because they want to flatter you and get money. But like, here's a hot tip is if you take 5 minutes to look on the internet and look at what the other guy did, like that'll help you a lot because you can actually talk about facts and that makes you more credible. But the other point that I want to make is it actually says a lot about the entrepreneur. It said a lot about Shane, right? Which is someone can kind of like essentially reject you to your face, and you just want to prove them wrong even more, right? You just want to, right? So to me, that's a diamond head, right? But the other thing that I think is so important though is that when someone has like ears, right? Because to me, if there's a diamond head that has no ears, there's no ear holes, like that's not going to work. Like that won't work. Like, you can't talk to someone like that, right? You talk to them and they're like, no, you're wrong, and it's sort of like, that's unproductive. It doesn't work.
Yeah, you need to be able to break through the wall, yet at the same time be mutable enough to very quickly shift and pivot into any number of unknown exchanges. And
yeah. Like you could be like, dude, that's a diamond wall. Like hit your head over here, right? And then,
yeah,
right. And they need to be like, okay, good. Like I have a diamond head, but a diamond wall isn't going to be fun for me. Like, I'm gonna have more fun hitting my head on this wall. It's like, okay, good, we're good. Okay, carry on, right?
yeah, you need to be stubborn enough to continue to move through so much rejection quite a lot, multiple times usually, but also smart enough to know the subtlety and the difference within those things that you're getting wrong through that process. It's been such a big learning process for me. A lot of my my early things that made me good at finding these kind of cutting edge trends was I studied a lot of like Indian cultural music, odd time signatures, very advanced long melodic basically
and ragas.
Yes, all the fun ragas. And so this abstraction of what I liked about research and what I like about finding interesting people kind of became the pin where I was like, okay, this is the one of those unique areas where you can combine skill sets that don't necessarily bring you here on because I feel like I ended up liking venture capital by accident because I like interesting people and I like fringe ideas. I'm like, oh, this is great. Like this is totally where I fit well. This new part though for me, Miko, is actually meeting so many different types of people and trying to find out how to, even if I don't necessarily like their idea, encourage them through the criticism properly, not to coddle people, but just to be productive enough to like help everyone along their way. Because often failure is what turns you into your next success. I think that during our studies of Nintendo was supposed to be a board game first, right? They were not a video game to begin with.
Yeah.
So you need someone who's like games, but also smart enough to go, okay, video games. That's the next thing. So part of one of the next questions I wanted to go in here was your thoughts on the metaverse. I'll just kind of leave it as an open space question. What's your thoughts on the metaverse?
Yeah, so I think that the metaverse is a confusing language. And the reason why I say the word metaverse is that whenever we hear about the metaverse, I feel like we go back to, obviously references like Neil Stephenson, and kind of sort of cyberpunk fiction, but I think right now it's about Ready Player One, right? So I think that the thing that is important to understand is that, this kind of idea of a centralized corporate dystopian metaverse, like in a sense, it's sort of that's the default metaverse narrative, right? So to me, like I kind of want to rail against the default metaverse narrative, which I think is currently being promoted by Mark Zuckerberg, right? But I think that he's smart enough to know and try to play the underdog, right? So I think he's been playing with experience with things like Novi, and with things like the Libra blockchain wallet stuff. So I think and obviously they have a lot of mishmash branding, things like DM. But like I would say that like if you look at Facebook, they're smart enough to potentially also pursue kind of NFT and pursue like blockchain based technologies, which I think form a metaverse kind of economy, right? So I think to me, that's what I'm excited about. I think immersive 3D virtual reality, in a way, it's like virtual reality is kind of nuts, right? Because in a sense, it's doing things that computers have a hard time with and humans are good at. Like if you go back to the golden age of video games, I like to talk about Pac-Man, right? So like you put like a 12-year-old kid in front of Pac-Man, and within like 10 seconds, he's like, you're that yellow guy, watch out for those other guys and like eat those things, and run away. And okay, now you can chase them because you ate this other thing, so like within seconds they understand it. And not only do they understand it, but their heart rate is increasing or decreasing depending on like what's happening, right? So as far as like creating an immersive experience, right, the brain is incredibly good at like you're this thing, and so like virtual reality makes computers work super hard to do things that humans do almost by nature, right? So I feel like the net marginal value of like immersion in this kind of 3D world, it's kind of maybe a little bit limited. I mean, that being said, like, I'm kind of like
Yeah, you're in the game.
I mean, I'm doing it, but like, but a bit begrudgingly, because I think for me, the bigger game is the metaverse economy, and we invested in YGG, or the Yield Guild, which I call the first metaverse labor union, right? So we're very excited about
Nice.
kind of the economics of the metaverse, right? Because a lot of what we see in metaverse literature is we see that the metaverse has a fully immersive economic universe. And I think the obvious candidate for that is much more related to blockchain. So that the term I use the most is what I call meta reality, right? And it comes from an insight that the symbolic and therefore currently digital layer is the layer that captures value, right? Because value is symbolic. People talk about intrinsic value, and it's such a garbage thing to say. Like as soon as someone says intrinsic value, except in the way I'm using it, which is in derision, right? If someone says intrinsic value and they're being derisive, then you're okay. But if they're saying it in all seriousness, you're headed for a garbage conversation, because it's someone who hasn't thought about what value is, right? So you're like, oh, so it's sort of like, why wrestle with a pig? You just get dirty and the pig just gets even more happy. So like, in a sense, like, don't enter conversations where someone's seriously using the phrase intrinsic value, because all value accrues to the digital symbolic layer, and that's the metaverse economy, and that's what I call meta reality. I think meta reality is much more all embracing, because it's much closer to the concept of AR, because it's sort of superimposed on the real reality, right? And so in a sense, like, it doesn't divorce from reality the way that the so-called metaverse does, right? Metaverse is kind of a divorce from reality. Meta reality is just acknowledging that all the value is a symbolic layer above the reality that we kind of enjoy. The reason why I think this is such an important principle or philosophical principle is because ultimately what we have is what I call consensual and consensus realities. And the consensus realities are going to be digital realities, right? I think physical reality has demonstrably been bad at producing a consensus reality, right? Which is, we can't even agree that there's like a virus like causing people to get sick, or we can't even agree on some basic facts, right? So physical reality is a shitty substrate for consensus reality. So like, I think that's the value of the digital layer. So I think we're going to see the digital layer become exceedingly valuable as a result.
Yeah, okay, so there's a few fun points to dive into there. I'll try to put them together into another question. First off, starting off the idea that Mark Zuckerberg is going to probably miss the point just due to the fact that the metaverse itself is evolving in people that generally don't like this monotheistic version of any platform. And that's what you see some of it's turned into. For good reason. A lot of investors become evangelical because there is a sort of religious attitude necessary to make it through a decade of being a good investor to begin with. You almost because you have to be the diamond head, right? You got to be able to cut through the shit. And a lot of people just have nothing but faith holding them on for that ride. So within that, I think that we're seeing the development. And maybe too, it happened to Blockbuster, it happened to Kodak. They generally drop the ball that's right in front of them because the developing ecosystem of the people are somewhere else, doing something else, not necessarily working at Facebook. You held up the VR goggles. It's maddening to think how quickly this will develop into, like we were saying, an interactive substrate on the reality that we're currently existing in, like with Google Glasses, or the ability to look at things and give you like a heads up display of what's going on. It's all evolving very quickly. But this other area that you touched into, I think, is super important. Where I put the weight of the next part of the question here was in this interpretation of value, and you pointed out something too that I liked here, which is that it was a digital representation. The mind itself, you look back to all these different ancient texts around meditation, and we know that the majority of what we actually are perceiving is nothing but vibration, or these electrical impulses that are drugs to some degree, or viewed as drugs, and that people often don't understand how valuable the pineapple is, so that there is no clear consensus of why the pineapple, which has survived 1 billion years and tastes delicious for who knows whatever reason, is only worth $2, and that people associate price to value, and that there's a massive disconnect in this consensus mechanism that you're talking about in what's actually valuable. Because when push comes to shove, the only intrinsic value is likely things like air and water, and like a more like the substrate of community. Is there like love in your life?
I even think air and water have contextual value, right? I think it depends on what you're trying to do.
Right. No, for me, this idea about what's intrinsically valuable is like, okay, just anything based off the survival mechanism, like can the body survive effectively, let alone the ego mind enjoying the.
But I think I just want to cut all the way to the root and say that it assumes that you're trying to survive, right? Now, obviously, like I think from the practical perspective of economics, that's a very good assumption, right? Because economics is the law of large numbers, right? So if you can come up with a scheme that applies to like a general group of people in large numbers, then you're fine. So saying like large numbers of groups of people tend to want to survive physically, like that feels good. Like that feels
I think everybody wants to survive physically. Yeah, that seems.
It feels like a safe thing, but it's actually provably false. It's actually probably like it's good for economics, right? So if you're doing economics, it works, right? But I would say that like there are situations where someone doesn't want to survive, right? And
yes, but it's much rarer than those of people wanting to survive.
It is, but it proves that value remains contextual. Right. It remains contextual.
Yes, we agree on this. I often say that value is basically a hallucination of any number of memetics within the society. So the fun part of where I wanted to go here was into these kind of value propositions, because I've focused on layer one and the solutions. This idea of the metaverse, this workforce in the digital world, myself recognizing the scalability of the digital world. Why I do the YouTube videos is because it's much more scalable than standing on a side of the road yelling at people or something. It's a better format. So in this space where value is difficult to sometimes, like the market is clearly able to assert things before people. I'm not looking at NFT world going, oh, these people are stupid investing in JPEGs. Like clearly the market it knows something often that I don't when I see this stuff. In this growth of the metaverse, the speed at which I think the DAOs are going to evolve, how do you think a clear leader will evolve? And I'll just leave it at that. How do you think that because of this distinction of value, like, and how do you, let's look at it like that. It's a weird one because it has nothing to do with the people. Sometimes people like all sorts of weird stuff I would have never imagined. Like,
I think sustainable leadership requires kind of obviously lots of personal characteristics, right? But beyond the personal characteristics, I think that, including things like vision, and these types of things. And I'm very much a proponent of kind of first principles reasoning, right? So the ability to actually kind of like come up with sort of sophisticated models that are based on grounded observation of some form of reliable substrate, right? So I would say that those are necessary preconditions, but they're not enough, right? I think coming back to what we were describing, we think that this space is actually prone to kind of creative destruction. Right. And so in a way, like prolonged leadership, especially in the context of venture capital where a fund life cycle can almost be 10 years. Right. And, we don't day trade or flip coins. Right. And I think that a lot of entrepreneurs actually value that. They like having investors who just, who want them to build what they want to build, and they want to wait. They're patient and they want to see the results, right? Because the belief is in the thing that they want to build, and so to me, the sustained leaders, I think obviously have these personal qualities. They're builders for sure, right? But the other thing that I think is really important is this idea of a network effect towards that phrase I used earlier, which is, does the market want there to be a single big one, right? Because if you look at something like Axie Infinity, if you look at the natural creative destructiveness of tokenized network effects, right, the market actually doesn't want there to be a big game, right? Now, if you look at it deeper and say the market wants there to be a big kind of consensus reality, right? Then you start to look at things maybe more like Sandbox, right? Which is kind of more of an attempt to be a consensus reality than a game, right? Because the market doesn't want there to be a big game that will be the game that ends all other games. Like that, the market doesn't want that. The market wants consensus realities. And it probably wants what I call a Pareto consensus reality, which is a reality that like 80% of people acknowledge to be valuable, and they don't spend all their time there, but they just go there occasionally to see what other people think is real, and I think there'll always be 20% of people that don't even believe in that reality. But I think that, there will be a player that's fighting for the role of being the Pareto consensus reality. I think right now that's Bitcoin, but that's a very limited reality that only has things to say about who gave what Bitcoins to whom. But, as far as being reliable and secure and trustworthy, I think a lot of people have noticed that it hasn't lied to us yet. And that as a consensus reality, something that doesn't lie to you over a long period of time tends to accrue consent, right? People tend to consent to it for that reason.
Yeah, so the fun part there is Bitcoin feels like it went public this year. I think a lot of people felt like this is Bitcoin's like IPO year effectively. So if you were in any time in Bitcoin up until this year, you were effectively a venture capitalist of some kind. And again, this opportunity I think wasn't really at the doorstep for people. Last time you and I were chatting, talking about asymmetry, this idea, I agree with you. I don't think you should effectively ever let go of assets. And one of the difficult parts here is measuring that large asymmetric upside. And it's one of the disservices, I think, in the community when people compare like Facebook to Bitcoin. It's like, yeah, but you're not comparing if you were David Cho painting the office and you got like a $20,000 investment at seed stage. And then those numbers of growth are astronomically higher than, because the public offering is basically like a giant pump and dump. It's like the public pump and dump effectively. It's the
yes.
It's the SEC regulated version of what a pump and dump looks like at scale. So what I really like about this sector is because these open what if we don't go to from the ICOs to the IEOs, that there's global speculation on new projects. What are some of the things that you've been most excited to see that you didn't expect coming over the last year or two?
I would say the birth of this kind of blockchain gaming space as kind of an on-ramp, right? So, it's pretty amazing, right? Like, I think after our diligent analysis of Axie Infinity, we concluded that the game wasn't very fun. I was talking with a friend of mine, Steve McKeon from Collab Currency, and he pointed out to me at Mainnet, he pointed out that like it's funner than driving an Uber, and so it really hit me hard. Like I was like, wow, you're better at this than I am, like that's the right mindset, right? So we're at the dawn of something that I think is as fundamental as Bitcoin. And I know that sounds hyperbolic, and I'm not actually saying Axie is. I'm actually saying that blockchain play to earn gaming is as fundamental as Bitcoin, because Bitcoin effectively, people talk about this idea of like self-sovereignty, right? But I think the thing that's really interesting about what's happened with Axie is that Axie has recognized the sovereignty of the ownership of users' non-fungible time. Right. So it's a time asset, right? So it's basically saying, well, there isn't a physical asset, it's a time asset, right? And in a sense, just like computers perform proof of work, right? In a sense, Axie players are proving their work, right? And in a sense, the thing to me about a grind mechanic is not only are they proving work, but they're kind of proving devotion, right? Which is that, they're devoted to this activity, to this brand, right, to this concept, and that proof of devotion is a mechanism that they can use to transfer into fungible assets, right? So as a function of that, they become people who invest their time. So I just want to close off by this idea by saying three things, right? Which is you're either wasting your time, you're spending your time, or you're investing your time, right? If you're wasting your time, just think about the time spent on something like Facebook. And the reason why you're wasting your time is that the platform owners are becoming insanely wealthy and you are not, right? So that's a waste of your time, right? One way to know that you're spending your time is it's much more neutral, right? But I would say that the way that you're investing your time is that you end up with assets. Right. So when I say investing, I'm literally talking about investment, because investment is activity that culminates in the ownership of assets. Right. So if you're an investor and you don't own assets, you're not actually an investor. Like I don't know what you're doing, but it's not investing, because like, the assets you own may be worthless, but like you will own assets, right? Like you have to own assets. Otherwise you're not an investor. So a time investor is someone who's converting their time into ownership of assets. And that's a person who's not wasting their time. Right. So that to me, the declaration of sovereignty over people's time is, I think, it's shots fired. Like it's an irreversible economic transformation.
Yeah, we actually have a lot of really similar points to our thesis here. I enjoy it. I felt the exact same way, that these people are investing hundreds of hours playing video games. This is the effective version of mining assets. And that they're all, because they're participating in the network growth. In early 2017, I thought that we would see this develop more quickly on the social space, like on something like a Twitter, Steam, like Steam, because Steam looked like it was going to go down the road. But I wholeheartedly agree that the majority of the adoption curve is going to come likely from this video game metaverse sector, because of this this deflationary process of removing the middleman. Right. Yeah. The Axies was this shining moment for these play to earn games, or this like mining within the game, the participation growth. Everyone starts sharing, collaborating, playing against one another, growing the name of Axies, growing the evaluation of the speculation of the game, what's possible. And that because a lot of people around the world don't have access to identification, still don't have access to a bank account, how could they then go to buy an asset? Well, if they can play their way into asset ownership, it's like they don't need any of those old frail mechanisms of onboarding a community. They can onboard themselves with the cell phones that they already have by logging in with an email or any of these effective things. So I'm totally on board with you here as well. I think that the video game sector is the curve. Yep.
2.7 billion global gamers. So that's a
Yes.
large number.
Yeah.
I think it's more like something like 4 billion internet users, the vast majority of which are mobile, right?
Yeah.
And about 54% of gamers are in Asia. So it's a really interesting dynamic. And I think Axie is kind of hit this like trifecta, right? Like it's definitely sort of built the on-ramp. But for us, what's more exciting and important from an investment perspective is that the universe doesn't actually want there to be a durable single game. I think the universe wants there to be a single durable guild, right? So we looked at our logic around this idea of a labor union is if you look at a large union like the teachers union or United Auto Workers, right? So in a sense, what the purpose of the size is to amplify collective action, right? So a guild is simply a mechanism for distributing the proceeds of collective action, right? And therefore, the greater the collective action, the better. Now, the ironic thing is that Axie is a single player game. But the thing that's really clear about YGG is that they're actually performative at the layer of the multiplayer economic metagame, including
Mm.
things like management, right? So if you go to like Axie.management, or you look at this kind of like, what John Lai from A16Z calls the kind of management sim game, right? That there's actually a multiplayer economic metagame above that. And ultimately, when you look at YGG, you can also look at it as almost like a talent accelerator, because
Mm.
once you become a manager, you can actually become a scout for the next Axie game. And if you become a scout, you can actually direct investment funds from the guild treasury into the new game. And at which point you can become the sub DAO leader for the new game. And at which point you kind of become almost like you own the castle, you own the continent, like, you have the armies, like you actually literally become sort of a virtual sovereign, that represents your initial time investment, right? So I think it's this kind of creation, it's the acknowledgement of sovereignty of time, and then eventually this kind of like creation of virtual sovereignty. So I think it's a really amazing sort of development.
Yeah, I definitely didn't see it arriving, but just the removal of the middleman all the way along this financial and asset layer has been fascinating. Just to kind of we'll close up here, but the idea around Bitcoin being money. One of the things I've always liked about this is that it's up to choice. And that's one of the I was always a big fan of Dogecoin because of this, is that I've lived life for long enough to know that there are a number amount of ridiculous, unimaginable things that happen, and they happen frequently, or like the unknown or the impossible thing is happening all the time. And
Yeah,
that it's smart to make it bets on those investments based off, okay, well, we can only lose so much off any of our sentiments here, but that attitude of playing and exploring something is so valuable. And that's, again, what I like about the metaverse sector is it doesn't seem as maximalist, like, oh, well, there can only be Bitcoin. It's like, no. If you break it apart, the idea of decentralization is that you should be able to choose anything that you want and trade freely. And that's what I really like about this, is that you can trade, like, from a smooth love potion to an Ethereum to a wrapped Bitcoin, all within the whole ecosystem. There's no one really getting in your way. You can kind of play your own economic game. And I think you're right that there's two parts that will grow here. Is that if we already like we've been looking at a few games that already have like the built-in lending of the internal NFT assets to other players, and yield earning built into the loan models of the NFTs. Yeah, so it's super fascinating to see how all of these little tweaks will come together to like a financial powerhouse of not just the people that play the games. Because after we chatted with a few esports teams, we're just trying to figure out what the hell is going. I know nothing about video games, right? I'm like, to see how all of these moving pieces will come together. Because now the video game players are going to become likely some of the larger asset holders based off their video game play time, and
for
then
sure.
they'll help develop the next games, which may make them even more popular and even more enveloped for the whole sector itself. So I think it's a liftoff point for crypto as well. I agree. The adoption curve here is going to be so fun to watch. Okay, last few, we'll fire them off with short questions. Got any favorite books
Yeah,
you would recommend?
absolutely. So I know this is kind of maybe an unpopular book, but I'm currently reading the Odyssey. by Homer.
Okay,
But
nice.
I think skip the first like 10 books, right? Because there's all these mythology monsters and things like that. The thing to watch is how he deals with the suitors. So he gets back to the throne of Ithaca, and he's basically trying to figure out how to get rid of these people living in his house, eating his pigs, and just generally like try to pick up his wife. Like it's so as far as a book on kind of like asymmetric military strategy, and as a book on, but ultimately it's a book about kind of the return of the king, right? It's a return. It's a book about how someone enters the center of their own power. And the thing that's amazing about it is at the end of the book, peace and power are the same thing, which is it's all justice, peace, power. It's the throne of Ithaca, right? So in a way, like it's fascinating. And to me, when you look at books like that have survived the test of time, there's a lot of goodness in it, right? People are still telling this story, that survived the Bronze Age, right? So I think it's an oldie but a goodie, let's say.
Nice, good durability on that one. That one of my friends introduced me to the poem "The Journey to Ithaca" as one of my favorite pieces. Just this search for self and the center.
But skip the kind of, it's almost like if you go back to watch like the X-Files, there's like a Monster of the Week episode. Like just skip the first 10 books of the Odyssey, because it's just a bunch of episodes about him fighting a different mythical monster, and they all turn out, by the way, so spoiler alert, like he beats the monster. Right? So I just saved you like 10 books worth of reading. Now just cut to the end, and the last part of the book is basically like him fighting humans, and that's less obvious. It's the strategies are really interesting, and he's very there's a good reason why he's probably the biggest Greek hero. He's super good at this game.
Awesome. Okay, I'll write that one down, and we'll skip 10 books ahead. Okay, next one is just a kind of an open-ended question. What do you do outside of your time? Or that's a weird way to ask that question. Some people like, what's your favorite thing? Like, what are some of your favorite valuable quality time things to do on your, like, just by your own? Like, for instance, I love ice baths.
That's super amazing. I've been getting into like sort of fitness, and I've been getting into things like VR fitness, and I just
VR
like
fitness?
yeah, there's I think it's interesting because like it's sort of there's a game called Supernatural that kind of mixes the best things about Beat Saber and the best things about like Guitar Hero with the best things about like other kind of more fitness apps, so I'm definitely getting into kind of connected fitness, and that's been a fun hobby.
Awesome. Yeah, I started picking up the deadlift recently. That was another one
Amazing.
of those like
That's
kind
a
of
big
simple.
deal.
Yes. There's something about those simple I know Nassim Taleb was a fan of those just because of the asymmetric return for like, here's one simple thing you can do that will work like all the things you want, basically.
It's super
Okay.
time efficient. Deadlifting
Yes.
is, yeah.
Yes. Yeah, I've fallen in love with deadlifts and kettlebells the last few months as well. Okay, next question is blockchain and venture capital related. I'll do it kind of a Gary V way, like, well, underrated something and overrated something.
So with respect to kind of blockchain and venture capital,
Yeah,
yeah, I
any
mean,
avenue. Kiteboarding.
so yeah, so I would say that like I would say currently I think the Ethereum killers are kind of ahead of their skis. Like if you actually look at the overall things, like if you look at network revenue capture, so I would say Ethereum killers are kind of overrated at the moment. I would say Ethereum is probably underrated. I think
Really interesting.
I think people aren't ready for like what's going to happen with Ethereum. Like Ethereum since 1559 has like literally burned over 2 billion USD worth of Ethereum, and like it's definitely the ultrasound money. I think it's the developer platform. Solidity is kind of a warts and all thing. Like I don't love Solidity, but like it works. So like as far as like having a bright future, and I think we'll probably move into a EWASM, like a WASM style world, but I still think that like EVM is still a thing, and I think Ethereum is very underappreciated. But I think the shift to proof of stake is gonna be interesting. That'll be exciting.
Yeah, I'm well, the last time we talked, you were getting into OpenSea and we were heavily focused on Solana and Avalanche at those moments. Yeah,
Great picks though.
yeah, no, yes, I mean, very, very excited when the theme comes together. You're like, yes, I got it right again. I got it right. It's not,
Well
I mean,
done.
the financial rewards are fun, but it's fun to like, for instance, I like studying pretty much anything. I'm a huge fan of psychedelic mushrooms, and we were trying to talk about this idea of being a diamond head. Like the first time just a kind of a side point here for you, Miko. The first time I took psychedelic mushrooms was like 16 years old or something. It instantly changed my world. But the point of it here is there was one of those moments where I had to basically be a hard head through everything. People were calling you a criminal, and I thought it was one of the most fascinating things to study. Like this whole world is amazing. Why are we not spending more time researching? Clearly, something interesting going on over here. Anyways, the reason why I brought that up is just because you like when you pick something and you're early in the theme, you have to hold on through all sorts of name calling to
Yes,
get it right
absolutely.
effectively. Well, Miko, I know we're right up on the hour here, and I don't want to jump over too much. It's a pleasure to chat. I had a great time with you today. I'm a big fan of yours. For everyone as well, you can go to miko.com. I didn't have enough time to put the rest of your social media channels up, but they will be there.
That's
So
fine.
please send those to me when we're done today's chat. I think it's me. Is it still Miko Bits at Twitter, or did you know it's Miko Java now?
Miko Java. Yep.
There we go. Okay, those will all be down for support Miko. He's got great content, does a nice podcast as well. Super stoked. I look forward to the next time we get to meet up and hang out. Remember to give us a thumbs up if you like this. Any questions, comments, leave that down below. Miko, it's a pleasure to chat with you today. I look forward to the next time.
Yeah, it's always a lot of fun. Thanks so much.
Yeah, you as well. Thank you. Bye.
Cheers.
Awesome. Went great.
Great. Okay, yeah, that was a blast. It was very fun.